In this video, I'm going to show you how to record directly into Garageband on your MacBook so that you can record your own music at home. Now to do this, you're going to need an audio interface. And the one I have here is a Focusrite Scarlett Solo. This is an older model. The newer models are slightly different, a little bit more expensive, but essentially it does exactly the same thing as this does. This is USB-A, which is important because my MacBook Pro is USB-C. So that means I need an adapter to go from USB-A to USB-C. Don't rush out and buy the USB-C model of these because, to be honest, you don't get that much difference. This is going to work perfectly fine, the USB-A version, and you just buy the cheap adapter and away you go. So it has a couple of things on the front. It has a mic input, a guitar jack input. Now these are going to be important because this is called Channel 1 and Channel 2. And we'll talk a lot about that when we're setting up our Garageband. It has these knobs next to it. These are called gain knobs. This is how strong the signal coming from your instrument or your microphone is in going into the software itself or into the MacBook. We will need to adjust these. The way you adjust it is you basically play or you sing, depending on which one you're using, and it should light up green when you're bringing signal in. If it hits red, if it changes red, then it means the signal is too strong. So you need to back that gain off. And ideally you want it just at the point where the green light is on, just before it hits the red light. So you might have to adjust it a little bit, and keep in mind different effects and different equipment that you use is going to affect this differently. So if you've got 3 or 4 different guitars, every time you plug a different guitar in here, that's going to affect the gain. So you might have to just readjust those fairly often. So keep an eye on that. It has phantom power. So if you're using a condenser microphone that requires phantom power, you can turn that on and turn it off. We have a master volume and a headphone jack, which obviously when you're recording, you're going to be using your headphones, so you'll be plugging into there. On the back, obviously a USB connection and output there for speakers if you're running speakers. That's pretty much all there is to it. There's not a lot to these devices. They just plug straight in and away you go. So let's do this. Let's go and make some music. Okay, so the first thing you'll need to do is you'll need to tell your MacBook that it's actually connected to the Focusrite. So if I go up to the little Apple icon here, and I'm going to go to System Preferences, and you'll see there's an option called Sound. So I'll click on Sound, and here you can see I've already had this previously set up, so it knows that it's there. But you'll need to make sure that your input is selected as your USB audio interface. In this case, it's the Focusrite. And the output should also be the same thing. So that way you can plug your headphones in and you can listen to what you're actually playing. Once you've got that set up, now you can launch GarageBand. Now, GarageBand is a free download. If you don't have it on your MacBook, you can go to the App Store. So again, clicking on the Apple, choosing the App Store. And if you just type in GarageBand, there we go. There's the app there. You can download that and install that for free. So I've already got it set up, so let's launch it. When you first launch GarageBand, it's going to say, well, what do you want? What kind of project do you want? We just want an empty project, so we're going to choose that one. And then it will say, well, okay, what kind of music are you going to be doing? Now, if I was doing some singing, maybe I'd choose that one. I'm going to be playing the guitar, so I'm going to choose this one. It doesn't make any difference because when you actually do this, you're going to be adding extra tracks anyway. So you can choose whichever one you want. You can add the extra tracks later. It's not going to matter. What is important is this down here, this input 2. This is where I've got my guitar plugged into my Focusrite. I've actually got it in input 2 because that's the way it goes on my Focusrite. If I was doing some singing, then I'd need to make sure I choose input 1. But in this case, it is input 2, so that's fine. And I want to tick this. I want to hear my instrument while I'm playing because obviously that's rather important. So I'm going to keep that way and I'm going to click Create. Okay, so now GarageBand has loaded in. You can see I have one track there set up for guitar, and GarageBand has already automatically selected all of these settings for me. Now I can go and change these settings, and we're going to do that in a moment, but I want to talk about some of them first. Namely down the bottom here, this bottom panel, you've got record settings. is grayed out because this is being controlled by our audio interface, by the Focusrite. So we don't have to worry about that. You'll notice it says input 2. Right? Again, that is where we select the input. And every time we create a new channel, we're going to have to make sure that we are choosing the correct input. So we'll talk about that as we go through. And then there's the monitoring so that you can actually hear. That was that little blue tick that we ticked before. Here it is again. We need to make sure that's turned on so we can hear what we're playing. Then we have this thing called a noise gate, which we'll come back to. And then we have plugins. And plugins are basically just effects and other processing that makes your sound better. Now, there's a whole bunch of presets already put in there. You can actually go in and edit all of those, but you know, for this tutorial, we're not going to do that. We're literally just going to say, yep, we're going to leave it as is. Now, over on the right-hand side of this bottom panel, you have 3 icons. The first one is our tuner, so we can tune our instruments. Okay, just a quick tip. When you're tuning your instruments, always tune it to the same tuner. We do this because if there is some maybe intricacies or some differences between tuners, then that won't be picked up on the recording. So if everything's tuned to the same tuner, it will sound the same and it'll mesh together quite nicely. So just keep that in mind. All right, we'll close that. The next item we have is the pedal board, and this is only for guitars. If we had our vocal stuff set up, we'd see some different things here, but these are the pedal boards so that guitar players, you know how this works. You can drag these in and you can change the sounds and you can make whatever sound you want, or you can just drag that out again, get rid of that. So you can play around with that. And then the last setting there is our amplifiers. Again, we can go through and change all of our amps and change all the settings to get something that you're happy with. You could spend hours playing around with that stuff. Really, it's up to you if you want to do that or not. But for this tutorial, we're just going to go through what's already preset. Okay, so if I play my guitar, now you'll be able to hear something actually coming through. There we go. So I can hear the sound, I can hear my recordings as I do them. So now I'm going to talk about this noise gate that I mentioned earlier. The noise gate down the bottom, what this does is it basically gets rid of the horrible noisiness of amp models and other things that we don't want, and it basically kind of cuts it off at the end. So if I go to, for example, let's see, I choose distorted guitar, and I'm going to choose big hair harmonics because as awesome as this sound is, I know it's going to have some problems. So when I click on that and now I play, okay, so you heard that real high-pitched squeal at the end. That's the stuff we don't want. So if I go down to the noise gate and I crank that up, what will happen is it should take most of it out. So you can see it's much less now. That squeal is still just there, but it's much less. So what I would do is, in this case, I would then adjust this slider, this noise gate, until I get it to the point where I'm kind of happy with it. But I do have to keep in mind that the more I adjust this, the less my sustain is going to be. So for example, if I drag that down and then play this, so yeah, really nasty. But if I bring this right up and play it, the noise is gone. But did you notice how when I did that, the note actually dropped off at the end there? That's what a noise gate does. So you will have to play around with this until you find a happy medium that kind of works for you. So I've played around with this, so I kind of know roughly where it should be. But anyway, I'm going to choose another amp model here. I'm going to choose this one. Now, when I do this, you'll notice it's now whinging because it said, hey, you've made some changes. Well, I don't want to keep those changes, so I'm just going to say continue. And now I've changed my amp model. Okay, there's still a bit of a horrible squeal going on there, so I'm going to crank that up a bit, try and get rid of that. I don't think I'm going to get rid of that. I think that's just this particular amp model, which is unfortunate. I could spend a fair bit of time playing around with the settings, and I could probably find a way of getting rid of some of that stuff. But for this tutorial, we're not going to do that. Okay, let's go and record. So when I record into GarageBand, what I want to do now is I want to deal with this stuff up at the top. So I've got my stop, play, record, and I use my spacebar to do a lot of this stuff because that triggers in the playing and recording, which is nice. Then I have up here, obviously that's my bar 1, beat 1, and I have my tempo. And tempo is pretty important because that's the speed of the song. So I might want to change that to say 132. I can just click on that and change that. Then I have my timing, so I can change my time signature. If you're playing rock music, then most of the time it's going to be in 4/4, but you might be doing something a little bit different, so you might want to change that time signature. And then I can also change the key. Now the key signature is only important if you are using software, those smart instruments and stuff that Apple supplies you with. If you're just recording your guitar and you're just singing straight into your MacBook, then the key signature does not make any difference at all. So I'm just going to ignore that. Then I have my tuning fork again another place to tune up, and I have the metronome. Now, metronome is there to keep you in time. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of metronome, definitely not in GarageBand. I mean, listen, this is what it sounds like. Okay, yeah, not real cool. I really don't like that sound. It's a horrible sound, and it gets lost once you start playing. So what I do, I actually add in a virtual drummer. So I go over to this section here, and I'll right click in the panel here, and I'm going to add a drummer track. And this will bring me in a virtual drummer. Now I have drums that I can play along to, and I can just grab that and drag that around. Stretch that out. I can also add extra parts, and I can do all sorts of interesting things with this drummer. I can kind of get it to play and sound good and do some other interesting things. You could spend, again, hours doing that, but we just have a listen. Excellent. So now I can actually play along with a drummer, which feels more natural to me, and yeah, much better. So let's record something. Now, when I hit record, it's going to give me a 1-bar count, so that's important to know. All right, some software will give you 2-bar counts. This one gives you a 1-bar count before it actually kicks in, and that's where that metronome comes in. You can listen to that metronome. So let's do that. But we need to hit record, not play. Okay, does not support recording. All right, okay, cancel. Now, what happened there was something I should have mentioned. You need to highlight the track you actually want to record on, okay? Otherwise, you're not going to record anything. All right, let's try this. Okay, so there we go. I've got one track in. Let's have a listen back to that. Okay, it's not bad, it's not great, but anyway, this is only a tutorial. Now, just a tip, when you are recording guitars, always do it twice. So I'm actually going to right click on here, and I'm going to say new track with duplicate settings. So if I've played around with all my settings and I don't want to have to try and do that again, I can do that. It will then give me another track with the exact same settings that I just had, going down, making sure I'm still in input channel 2, and I have got my noise gate and my monitoring turned on. So I'm going to record another guitar track. Excellent, sounding pretty good. All right, so now I want to add another track. I want to add some more to this. So I'm going to right click down on here and new track. Now in this case, what's happening now is it's creating just a blank track. Okay, nothing fancy. Hasn't preset anything for me, but I can go over and choose what I want. So if I want the vocals, maybe I want to do some singing, I can choose a vocal and it will do exactly the same thing as it's done for the guitar, right? Acoustic guitar and electric guitar and bass. again, I'm going to go to, I'm going to choose that big hair harmonics. Why not? What a great sound. Fix that noise gate up first. Now that I've done that, you'll notice it's actually said, well, it's now in input 1, which is not what I want. I actually want in input 2, remembering that's where my guitar's coming into, not input 1. If I was singing, yes, input 1. And I also want to make sure I turn on my monitoring so I can actually hear what I'm about to play. So let's have a listen and we'll play something that goes along with that. Okay, let's have a listen back to that, see what we did. Okay, so at the moment it sounds pretty messy. So what I can do is now I can just adjust maybe some volume levels and do some really basic mixing. So I might choose my guitars and I'll bring them down. Now, interestingly enough, all these are set at 0 dB. You don't actually want anything to be above 0 dB. That's always a mistake a lot of people make. They think, oh, I'm going to crank that up. No, you actually got to go down. So I'm going to bring that down to about 4. I'm going to bring that down to about 4. And then I might bring that down, maybe down to about 2. And let's have a listen to that. Okay, there we go. That's a rough recording. Now, one thing I haven't explained, what if I want to use a reference track? Now, using reference tracks are really important because sometimes you want to get a certain sound or you want to maybe play along with a song. So how do I do that? Well, if I just shrink this out of the way, move that out of the way. Here I have a song already downloaded and all I've got to do is just drag that in and drop it here somewhere. And it should create a new track. There we go. There's a new reference track. And now I can listen to that and I can actually play along with that song depending on what it is. And fantastic, away I go. Now, let's assume I've finished my song. I now want to export it. The first thing I want to do if I'm using a reference track is I want to actually mute that. I don't want that coming through my song. And also I want to make sure that I turn off the metronome. Don't want that coming through on my recording, okay? And now I'm going to go to the share menu up here and I'm going to say, well, I want to export the song to disk. So I'll click on that. And now I've got this option to send it to my desktop, right? Now, when I do this, right, I want to choose the correct file format. For most people, it's going to be MP3. But if you are going to send your music somewhere to a professional studio to have it mixed correctly, or you want it to sound really awesome, you're going to upload it to Spotify or something like that, you actually really want it as a WAV file because that's not going to have any limitations on your song at all. So MP3 is fine if you're going to share it to your friends or whatever, but if you actually want to make it an official release, then it's going to be a WAV file. And they're much bigger in file size, so do keep that in mind. Okay, then I'd hit export and that would save it out. If you wanted to have this mixed professionally, or maybe you wanted to bring this into some better software to mix it with because Garageband is not great at mixing, then you need to export what we call the stems. Now the stems are the individual tracks. So if I wanted to export those separately, I first have to mute all of the tracks that are in the project. And then I'll start with the very top one and I'll unmute that and I will go to share and export song to disk. And when it comes up, I'm going to call this maybe Rhythm Guitar 1 and then make sure it's a WAV file and then I'll export that out. That will then just export just that one track. So then I would mute that one, go to my next track, unmute it, and then again, share, export song to disk, and this time it might be Rhythm Guitar 2. Make sure it's waveform and export again. And I would go through each individual track and do that each time. Unfortunately, GarageBand doesn't have any way of doing that in one go, so you do have to just do it separately for each individual track. Once I've done that, I could then take all of those individual files, I could bring them into maybe Logic or Pro Tools or Cubase and then mix it up correctly. Or I could take that to another studio and get them to make it sound really, really nice for me, so I've got a really nice finished product. So that's really all there is to it. Recording into GarageBand is a fairly simple process, and you can get some songs into there, you can get some pretty nice sounds. They're not going to be as good as you might get in a pro studio or with pro equipment, but you know, for free it's pretty good, so why not use it? Just keep in mind when you are recording your instruments, when you are singing, always checking that gain. It's so important, making sure it's the green lights comes on and not the red light. And every time you swap and change different effects, particularly inside GarageBand, so if you're using different guitar effects, always keep going back and just double checking your gain. Make sure your gain is not hitting that red light. You don't want that to happen. Other than that, that's really all there is to it. I hope you've got something from this video, and I'll see you next time.